Foreign Minister, welcome to 7:30.
Good to be with you.
Does the show of force that we saw in that large march at the weekend in difficult conditions, does it have a direct impact on the government's policy?
First, I want to say, that was an extraordinary march, and I think it demonstrates what we all feel. I know that Australians are feeling distressed, angry, upset, really horrified by what they're seeing in Gaza. I certainly share that distress, so do ministers in the government. And I know from my engagement with the Australian community, the extent to which this has become an issue that is really, really widespread across the Australian community. And I think the march demonstrated that.
Is it enough to shift government policy towards making Israel put the UN back in charge of aid delivery in Gaza?
Well, that is one of many things we have called for. And you're right, that was one of the things that I was part of an international collective statement on a couple of weeks ago, where we said it is, the model for delivery of assistance into Gaza is not safe, and it is not working. And you have seen the Prime Minister and I both talk about the importance of the need for aid to come in and expressing, I think, the concern the Australian community feel about Israel's decision to prevent aid from going into Gaza. But that is not the only thing we should be calling for and we should be doing. We should certainly be calling for ceasefire, the release of hostages, aid to flow. You've seen that the international community, Australia and others, are coordinating ahead of the discussions in New York in September. You've seen the public statements we've all made in relation to the need particularly for ceasefire and the release of hostages and for aid to flow.
Just to stay with the food situation at the moment, there were 6 more deaths from starvation or malnutrition reported at the weekend. The total is 175, 93 of which are children. If this wasn't Israel, would the world be tougher in its response?
Well, I think that's more a question that's probably a question you might be thinking about. I just want to get aid in, and we have made an announcement today of an additional 20 million, which takes our total humanitarian support for both Gaza and Lebanon to 130 million. We've chosen partners who have some capacity to get aid in, so the World Food Programme, the International Red Cross, the Jordanians who've been running field hospitals. We want to work to get aid in. But I would make this point, and I think I said this when we were in the press conference with the UK. I talked about, this isn't just stopping aid is not just a breach of international humanitarian law, it's a breach of our common humanity. And it can't be countenanced.
And yet the problem, Foreign Minister, is that it is being countenanced and it does continue, which takes me back to that question, which I would like to press you for an answer on, which is, if this wasn't Israel, would the world be tougher?
I don't agree that it is being countenanced. Why do you say that?
I think it is. It continues.
Even the US has made its position on that very clear, that aid does need to flow. So I don't agree. They are probably the strongest ally of Israel. I think the international community as one has said this can't occur.
I guess the point I'm making, if I don't want to get hung up on countenance as the word, the fact is it is still a problem. People are still dying from starvation. So whether or not it's being countenanced, it is a fact.
And it's horrific. It cannot, as the Prime Minister said, it can't be justified. It can't be defended.
And so where is the will from the international community to force Israel to allow more aid in and to ensure that that aid that gets into Gaza is properly distributed?
Well, I can speak for the part we play, and as you know, we're not the central player. But what we have done is worked with others in the international community to call for aid and humanitarian support to be delivered safely and at scale. I think you've seen quite a great deal of pressure being applied to the Israelis on that front, both publicly and beyond. And I would also make this point. President Trump himself has talked about the need for a ceasefire, for hostage release and for aid to flow.
Is it clear now that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war?
I think it is impossible to justify the withholding of aid from civilians.
Does that make it a fact then that Israel is using starvation as a weapon of war?
I think it is impossible to justify withholding aid from women and children. And I think you have seen across the Australian community people from very different perspectives make the same point.
Let me move on. The Prime Minister said last week that he's looking to have the greatest impact with the timing of Australia's decision to recognise a Palestinian state. What impact is he hoping for with that decision?
I think we all hope that this can be a contribution to a two-state solution, which is a contribution to peace. And what you have seen is Australia coordinating with others ahead of this conference in September. There's been a lot of engagement, a lot of dialogue about how we best contribute to that. We understand the urgency and we understand the importance of impact. And can I make an observation about why recognition is so important? It's more than symbolic. It needs to be a contribution towards a genuine contribution towards two states, because that is the only hope for peace. I am also of the view, and as are many others, that we cannot allow the possibility of a Palestinian state to be extinguished on the ground. And we see too many actions by the current Netanyahu government which are fly in the face of the possibility of a Palestinian state, which ultimately, I would argue, and Australia's view is necessary for the security of Israel.
Now, we understand the Prime Minister wants a phone call with Prime Minister Netanyahu. Is he hoping, or is he planning to use the threat of recognition as a point of leverage in the way that the UK Prime Minister has?
Well, I'll leave the Prime Minister to talk to you or talk to others as he sees fit.
But you must be discussing that phone call with him if it's to take place.
You would anticipate that the Prime Minister in his international interactions just as reflects the position that we articulate as an Australian government, as do I.
Does Israel want peace in Gaza?
Well, you can't see into people's hearts and minds, can you?
What's your interpretation?
Well, no, but what I would say is Israel has a right to security, and I would argue that the only pathway long term to peace and security is two states. That means a ceasefire, release of hostages and aid to flow, and progress towards a two-state solution.
I just want to put to you what the Israeli Foreign Minister said about the movement towards the recognition of a Palestinian state. He says they will recognise a Palestinian state on paper, he said. We will build an Israeli Jewish state on the ground. Is the international community impotent in the face of Israeli moves to increase settlements in the West Bank?
Well, you would have seen in the West Bank, in relation to settlements, that the Australian government, along with partners, have sanctioned to Israeli ministers for their role in the abuse of human rights of Palestinians.
And yet it goes on. We've got the Israeli government committing to 22 new settlements.
Let me finish. We have sanctioned those. We have sanctioned extremist settlers. And we have sanctioned entities which are associated with that, and particularly a violent enterprise around settlements. And the reason for that is because we want to do what we can to preserve the possibility of a Palestinian state. Again, I say, I believe, Australia believes, that is the only way to assure peace and security for Israelis and for Palestinians.
One of the key sticking points for one of the stipulations put forward by the Canadians, and it also put forward by the Prime Minister, is about the reform of the Palestinian Authority. But they have been, as an institution, for years held back by corruption and mismanagement. Can they realistically be relied on to build a new Palestinian state?
Yeah. This is, in the absence of certainly the current Israeli government wanting to be part of a peace process. What we have as an international community have to do is to try and provide momentum towards two states. Part of that is reform of the Palestinian Authority. Part of that is isolation of Hamas from this process, and I was very pleased to see both the Palestinian Authority and the comments by the Arab League, which really echo the same view that we have articulated, that we condemn Hamas, who is a terrorist organisation and should have no role. Now, obviously there are challenges, there are enormous challenges, but we do have to keep trying because of course, we want an immediate ceasefire, hostages released, and aid to flow. We want, the horrific scenes that we see to stop. But we want more than that. We ultimately want to contribute to peace and stability in the region for everybody.
The Australian government is part of a global movement, but you are creating momentum towards the UN meeting in September, where the possibility of recognition of Palestine will be first and foremost on the agenda. What is the next step in that momentum for Australia?
Well, I think you will see us continue to engage with others, both publicly and behind the scenes.
Well, we won't see of it if it's behind the scenes. What will be going on behind the scenes?
Well, yeah, I think if the question is a recognition question, I think that's what you're asking.
No,
me.
it's not. It's not. In fact, because the Prime Minister has already made it clear that it's a question of when, not if. So I want to understand what the next step is for Australia in being part of that momentum towards September.
Well, there is a lot of coordination and discussion with other parties and other countries, and I think we all recognise, this might be, I think someone said our last hope. I hope that's not the case, but we cannot stand by with what is happening in Gaza and not add momentum towards two states. We cannot stand by whilst the prospect of a Palestinian state is diminished on the ground by settlements and other statements. We have to find a way to push for and press for two states. As I keep saying, I cannot see long-term stability and peace for Israelis and Palestinians unless the Palestinian issue is resolved. The issue of the Palestinian state. That was the promise that the international community made when we established as a collective the State of Israel.
Foreign Minister, thank you very much indeed for talking to us. Thank you.
Good to speak with you.